talked, I think we might have mentioned on the show earlier, maybe yesterday, that Tucker Carlson was in Russia. If we didn't, we certainly have talked about it off air. Sometimes the conversations are very similar. But Tucker just released a video saying, yes, he's in Russia and he's there to interview Vladimir Putin. I think that's an indecision. I agree that if you can interview somebody at the center of a geopolitical universe, you should. Here's Tucker talking about his decision to interview Putin.
Most Americans have no idea why Putin invaded Ukraine or what his goals are now. They've never heard his voice. That's wrong. Americans have a right to know all they can about a war they're implicated in. And we have the right to tell them about it because we are Americans too. Freedom of speech is our birthright. We were born with the right to say what we believe. That right cannot be taken away no matter who is in the White House. But they're trying anyway. Almost 3 years ago, the Biden administration illegally spied on our text messages and then leaked the contents to their servants in the news media. They did this in order to stop a Putin interview that we were planning. Last month, we're pretty certain they did exactly the same thing once again. But this time, we came to Moscow anyway. We are not encouraging you to agree with what Putin may say in this interview, but we are urging you to watch it. You should know as much as you can. And then, like a free citizen and not a slave, you can decide for yourself.
I agree with everything he said there, Buck. I mean, I don't know what Putin's going to say. Obviously, some people are going to rip him. But I think if CBS, NBC, Fox News, CNN, any of these outlets had the opportunity to sit down one-on-one with Vladimir Putin, you would have to take it. I'm not sure what you lose by this. To me, it's a big get from a journalist.
We got to see how it goes. I respect. I like Tucker. You like Tucker, and I respect his chutzpah a lot, and what he's done over the years. Does this turn into just Vladimir Putin with the same talking points about the threat from NATO, et cetera, or is there something that we glean from this that is new, that is novel? There are limits, right? I mean, after 9/11, if you say, I'm not saying Putin is Osama bin Laden, but it would be quite an interview to sit down with Osama bin Laden after 9/11 and ask him, hey, so why'd you do that? But I think people would have a problem with that, right? So it's not just you talk to anybody because it's interesting. Although maybe some people disagree. Maybe they say, oh, my God, any American should talk to bin Laden.
I mean, I think, honestly, if your job is to be a journalist and there is a newsmaker, when you interview someone, this is my perspective is not that you're
I'm not
endorsing.
a journalist. Do you think of yourself as a journalist? This is where it also gets a little,
well,
I have opinions and views, right? I don't pretend to be neutral ever.
Yeah, right. But yes, on this show, you and I are saying exactly what we think. But if, for instance, I'm just tossing it out because you mentioned bin Laden, he's dead. If somebody from North Korea reached out to me and they said, Kim Jong-un wants to do a sit-down interview because he saw your opinion on the Chicago Bulls and he's chosen you of all journalists that he would want to sit down with. I think I would go. And I would sit down across from Kim Jong-un, and I would not give him my opinion
the whole time. Everybody, I wouldn't let him go. It's like, you can't do this.
But I mean, I wouldn't give my opinion. So I think, I would say Megyn Kelly has a super opinionated show, right? But I think she would argue, hey, I can sit down and also do a deep dive interview.
You can give a fair interview that I think would fall under journalistic approach. But I just, the title, I mean, I think journalist as a title is almost always a fraud regardless, but that's not, I know that's kind of secondary to the main point, which is to go and sit down and talk to Putin. I think I got to see
we'll see how it goes. I would say yes. I think if I were in that position, and the guy who's currently in war, and I would say, look, if somebody could have talked to Hitler during World War II and actually heard whatever Hitler was going to say, again, you're not endorsing. To me, leaders giving speech and answering questions in general is something that should be encouraged, even if sometimes they're lying.
Well, see, the problem, though, Clay, with interviewing Putin is you're interviewing him in Russia. You're not going to, the home turf advantage here isn't, it's not like when I go on the Bill Maher show and the imbeciles in the audience boo me. They might just say you're not going back.
Yeah,
and
I get it.
They might decide that they're going to hold you. That's not. Look what they just did. They had the whole thing with Brittany Griner. I mean, they've still got.
They've
Paul
got
Whelan.
the Wall Street Journal journalist that they're holding
Evan,
right now.
Much more in the moment here. Evan Gorskovich, They're holding him. He's a Wall Street Journal reporter, everybody. They're holding him. They're keeping him in a prison cell there. He did nothing
And I
wrong.
hope Tucker would say, hey, I think based on all the evidence I've seen, that guy should be released. Will he? I don't know.
Well, but what I'm saying is, are you really able to do an interview and speak truth to power when the person sitting down with you, as soon as those lights go off, could be like, yeah, no, we're just going to hold them for 6 months.
Yeah.
And some
that's the risk
Russian
of
prison.
going, right? That's the risk of going
Right.
is
But
how do you do
so
it?
there's more dynamics here. This isn't like, oh, Putin's at the UN and you get to sit down and have a chat with him where you can actually really push him. I mean, I think I know what he's going to say before he's, first of all, it's all through a translator, which means there's a lot that's lost in translation, obviously. I'm not judging it either way. I'm just saying this is tricky, because I remember a long time ago at the height of the Syrian civil war, it's a long story, but someone came to me in back channel and was saying, hey, I think I could arrange for you and maybe a couple of other people to sit down with Assad.
Oh, wow.
And it ended up not happening, and it was very early stage, and I didn't even agree to it. This is just an offer that was made. Someone said, hey, I think I could do that. I said, let me think about that. And then it sort of fell apart. But I mean, remember what happened with Tulsi Gabbard when she did that afterwards. Now, some people thought that was an act of bravery for her to talk to the Assad regime, go to Syria, all of that. But there's a fine line between, there's a fine line in some instances between speaking truth to power, getting the answers people need. And I'm hopeful that Tucker is going to do exactly that. And getting a little closer to like a Jane Fonda experience where you're hanging out with the enemy and letting them use you as a mount. Now, that won't happen with Tucker, but I'm just saying these are the addition. When you show up in a tyrant's lair, there are additional considerations that don't apply if you're just talking to somebody here in the States.
One challenge, by the way, too, which you just raised about being in Russia. I don't know how many countries Vladimir Putin can even travel to right now, given that there are war crimes accusations against him, where there wouldn't be the threat that he might be arrested or detained in some way.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I'm not even sure. I mean, that would be interesting to know. Did Tucker say, hey, can we meet in a neutral location outside of Russia? I don't know how many countries. I think Putin has traveled to China. I don't think you'd feel much more favorable in China than you would in Russia. I don't think there's very many democracies that would allow Vladimir Putin on their soil right now.
If I got you a sit down in China with Xi Jinping, would you be like, hey, man, the 1 million people you have in concentration camps, that's a crime against humanity. You need to stop that. You need to step down from power. I mean, Clay, I don't know if you'd make it back if you did, honestly. So this is the reality of the world that we live in, right? I mean,
I get it. I mean, that is the challenge. So we'll see what happens, but I do think it's worth mentioning that's going to go on.
It's fascinating, right? Look at us sitting here talking about all the different possibilities, but also the implications. And Tucker is one of my favorite people to watch and listen to in the space generally. So, I mean, I'm definitely going to listen to this interview. I'm just saying it's a field of landmines. There are landmines.
No doubt.
In this
and by the way, we didn't even mention, yes, obviously you're in Russia, but also how long does the interview go? Do you get to keep your tapes, right? Like who is recording it? There are many, and to your point, it's translated. So the difficulty there is you have to rely that the translator is telling you the truth, which is its own dynamic. Does Tucker have his own translator translating the translator? It is going to be amazing, I think, to follow.